Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome in. We'll give a few more moments here while people join the broadcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the bill that just passed the House. What was this, like
20 minutes ago?
20 minutes ago. So they're printing this thing out as fast as they can right now, getting it over to the president for his signature. And this thing is about to become law. So this is a really exciting time. Thank you for joining us today. We are excited to be able to bring you this update. So a recording will be available. So if anybody jumps on a little bit later, we'll go ahead and make that available. But my name is Tim Wilkins. I'm the business developer here at Cheney & Associates. Joining us on the call is David Wilkins. He works in our marketing department, and our owner and managing partner, Steve Cheney. Thanks for joining us today, Steve.
Good to be with everyone today.
So Steve and I, in the last 2 or 3 days, have read more Senate bill language than we ever thought we would in the last couple months. Just keeping appraised of all that's going on. There's definitely some exciting components of this bill that apply specifically to churches and nonprofits. Now, if you registered a week ago, you thought you were registering for a webinar where we were going to talk about the IRS when they released the refundable tax credits for paid sick leave and paid childcare leave, which if any of you have questions on that, we can definitely address those. We also have a webinar that we had recorded specifically addressing and identifying the IRS requirements. Now, this bill trumps that, and we can talk a little bit about that. The benefit offered in this payroll protection program far and away exceeds the value that you would receive through the IRS refund. So both of those are available. It's not like if you do one, you're excluded from the other. But after we walk through this, you'll definitely see why this is far superior. So just a quick disclaimer as we get into it here. We'll jump back and I'll introduce Steve in a moment. But just a quick disclaimer: we're not politicians or lawyers. Steve is a CPA, so he is the professional smart person in the room. I'm a recovering pastor, so if I talk a lot, you'll understand why. But really, we're both of us at our core are local church guys. We believe in the local church. We love the local church. My wife and I served on staff at a local church for a long time in executive pastor roles. And Steve has worked in and around and served churches for the majority of his career. And so when this stuff came out, our heart first and foremost was to get this information out to as many churches as possible, as quickly as we can, because we know that many of you are in a position right now where, as my wife and I were when we were on staff a couple times, where giving dips and the economy takes a hit back in 2008, and all of a sudden you're having very hard conversations with people that you love and care about, people that have been on your staff, but not just a part of your staff, have been a part of your faith community, been a part of your church. So this bill provides tremendous relief. So again, we're not lawyers or politicians. However, this is our professional opinion. It's our best understanding of the bill as it stands currently. And today our focus will be on the Paycheck Protection Program, which is a portion of the larger $2.2 trillion stimulus package that just passed. That is a staggering number.
Oh, for sure.
My goodness. Let me do a quick intro. We've got Steve on the call with us. He worked as a tax manager for Arthur Andersen, a Big Five accounting firm. He's been a national speaker for the AICPA many times over. Been working, like I said, with nonprofits for the majority of his career. For those of you that are with us and you are part of the Assemblies of God, you'll appreciate this little tidbit. Steve was the National Bible Quiz champion.
Oh, for sure.
And what year was that, Steve? Was it the 100th anniversary?
No. It was the 75th anniversary of the Assemblies of God in Indianapolis, Indiana.
There you go.
Yes, we took the #1 title that year.
There you go. So if you're joining the call and you're an aging minister, Steve is an AG boy through and through. I grew up Southern Baptist, so don't hold that against me. I did meet a girl though who went to an AG church who was prettier than the Southern Baptist boys I was hanging around with, and she eventually became my wife. So
Yes.
So we're a house divided. I grew up SBC. She grew up AG. So but we got love for all of it. So anyway, I just want to jump in. That's kind of a brief introduction. If you're not familiar with who we are, we're a CPA firm based out of California. We have a national presence though, and we work with hundreds of churches all across the United States and help them take care of their week-to-week and month-to-month accounting and finance needs. So enough on that. Let's go ahead and jump in and talk about what in the world is going on with this Paycheck Protection Program. All right, so we talked about the steps briefly. We just talked about how it passed House approval. So Senate had to approve it, House had to approve it. For all we know, President Trump could be getting ready to sign this thing right now, which is really exciting. I think they're rounding up pens and making sure they got enough paper in the printer for this thing, because it's a large bill. And then the last portion of this is it's going to go to the SBA committee, which is chaired by Marco Rubio, for instructions and details, which are then going to be disseminated out to the lenders, the banks and the lending institutions that will be originating these loans. And that is who we've been in direct contact with, is saying, hey, we want to get our churches to the front of the line. So when you get these instructions, send them right over to us. We have a direct contact with the SBA approved lender, which is pretty exciting. But should we get into the nuts and bolts of it here?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Let's do it. Okay. So Steve, talk us through what in the world just happened. Paycheck Protection Program. What's going on with it?
Yeah, let's give some quick highlights here. So who's eligible first for, you always want to ask the question, who's eligible for some type of tax or stimulus package? Ultimately, this is going to be a loan that is eligible to small businesses and nonprofits that have under 500 employees. Now, for a nonprofit, that means all 501c3s, and there's just one exception: anybody who does not receive Medicaid. So that would be like some type of healthcare agency or some type of entity that would give those type of benefits. But all the churches that we're speaking to today, as well as small businesses, sole proprietorships, small businesses, all of those people qualify. If they have payroll costs, this qualifies.
So just to jump in there real quick, if you're a pastor on the call and you have small business owners in your congregation, they may not be aware. You know, their CPA or their lending institution may have already reached out to them. If not, we will make all of this information available after the call. And this would be a great way for you to support the small business leaders in your congregation.
Yeah, for sure. When we get into the numbers of thinking what the church is going to get out of this stimulus, and then you think of every small business person in your church is going to get the same exact thing. Ultimately, you're going to get 2.5 months of payroll, right? And so with that, you think of every small business owner and all their employees get 2.5 times or 2.5 months worth of payroll costs. My goodness, this is incredible. So really the funding for this loan, it's going to give you a payroll loan equal to 2.5 times your average monthly payroll cost. We're going to talk about that. What does that mean? There are some limits that apply to it. And then ultimately, this loan can be 100% forgiven. We're going to talk to you about ways to make sure that it is 100% forgiven, as well as the funds that you do receive from this loan can be used to not only pay payroll costs, but it can pay mortgage, utilities. If you have rent, it could pay rent. It could pay some interest expense on loans, let's say for a copier lease or something like that, as well as retirement benefits it could pay. It could also pay your group health care insurance premiums. So there's incredible opportunities for how you use it.
Yep.
Whether it becomes a forgivable loan or not is dependent upon something we'll get into called a full-time equivalent. So I don't want to get ahead of myself, but this is a great plan. So ultimately, who's eligible is, we talked about the small business, nonprofits under 500 employees. Employee limit applies per location or campus. So let's say you have an organization, it's 1,000 people. And but they have multi-campus. So you do the 500 calculation on each campus, right?
Yeah, how this, if I could,
Yeah,
how
go
this was written, and again, this would be like if you have small business leaders there, thinking of like a Chick-fil-A, for example, right? The organization as a whole greatly exceeds that head count, but if you think about each location individually, that's where you get down to that per location or per campus number.
Yeah, like each franchise in that example would have its own corporation, so therefore they would be able to apply. The same thing applies though for churches. So let's say you have an affiliated church with the Assemblies of God or some type of church plant that might be underneath a governing body like the General Council, the Assemblies of God, or the district office of the Assemblies of God. There's a waiver for affiliation. So if that church filed payroll tax returns, 941s, for speaking about your quarterly tax returns for payroll, and they have an EIN number, that qualifies because they're a church, and a church is an automatic 501c3 exemption. So we're doing well there. This bill is very liberal and generous in those areas. Just to make sure we understand this, that a 501c3 organization that does receive Medicaid funds does not qualify. We probably don't have a lot of those on the call, but that just means that you're receiving stuff to provide healthcare, like a doctor, right? Or not like a doctor, but like a hospital, right? Things of that sort. Other SBA lending restrictions do apply. If the loan can only be as high as $10 million, well, that's a large loan, right? Mm-hmm. And so there's other limitations in regards to that. So it's important to realize that.
Why don't we get into the specific loan calculation? And just to take a quick pause there, I do see some questions coming in. David is moderating those questions. So if you want to ask a question privately, you can direct that question directly to the panelists, which are Steve and myself, or you can send that question directly to the host, which is David. If you're okay with that question being seen by the group, you can just go ahead and address that question to the group as a whole. And one of the ways that we'll be able to do that, since we do have so many people on the call, is if somebody asks the same question, you can always upvote that question. So we'll get to as many as we can. In the event that we're not able to do that, we will be consistently releasing updates and frequently asked question sheets. You can always also give us a call or shoot us an email with any additional questions. But just a quick note on that there. Loan calculation?
Let's do it.
Let's do it.
All right, so the formula is the average payroll costs, right, over an annual period. So 12 months divided by 12. We'll talk about that times a factor. Well, what do we come up with the payroll costs? So there's two major categories. There's employees and non-employee compensation. This is incredible. So pastor, leader, business owner, pay attention. This is where it hits right here. Employees, you can do all wages, including your cash tips, vacations, prenatal, like family, medical, or sick leave, all the wages, so the gross. Now, we're not sure right now on the clarification on how housing allowance will be treated. So as you know, for a church, housing allowance is not taxable to the minister. So they might just say the regular portion of wages is, the housing allowance would not be included, only the regular wages. We don't know that for sure right now, but all wages.
And this is one of those portions where we talked about earlier that once the president signs it, it's going to go to the SBA committee, and they're the ones that are going to kind of hash out all of the specific details.
More than likely, I would say, if you're asking me to put sort of a thing on it, I would say that probably it's going to be the taxable wages that are going to be included. That has been typical standard policy. So that's usually referred to as AGI, adjusted gross income for an individual. Now, if they use the word modified AGI, that's key term. Modified is key term because that could typically mean house allowance. Again, not trying to make it overcomplicated. That's why we're here, to help the church process this. Just want to make sure that we're being clear with the churches. The other thing, so payroll costs, that's one portion. The other cost that you get to add in for payroll costs is your group health care benefits, the insurance premiums. So if you have a pastor, let's say, or a business owner, and you pay for your employees, you pay their health care costs, guess what? That gets included into the calculation. The retirement benefits get included in the calculation. If you pay state or local taxes and they are included in there, the that is also included. If you also have laid someone, not say laid someone off, that's not the right word, as severance, like somebody left and you gave them a 3-month severance, you also get to include that in the calculation as well. So that's one, that's all the costs for an employee. Now, payroll costs also include what you pay to an independent contractor, like a sole proprietor, not a corporation. So if you pay a janitorial company to come in and clean your church or your business, and they are a sole proprietor, you get to add this in.
That's great.
Guess what? Guest speakers. Guess what? Evangelists. Guess what? I mean, you just keep going down the road. Like Cheney and Associates, we're a sole proprietorship. So guess what? You would add our fee. If that church paid us, we would add that fee into the calculation. Mm-hmm. Now there is a limitation, and we're going to talk about even more limitations in the next screen. But in each one of these calculations, it's determinable based upon an individual. Okay, or it's based upon the sole proprietor or the employee, the non-employee compensation that you're paying for. So it's limited up to $100,000 per person. Okay, in the calculation. So let's say you pay a pastor $150,000 a year, or someone in your business. You can only count the first $100,000 in wages, and that counts for everything, including their benefits and everything. Okay. So let's talk about what is not included in payroll costs. So what is not included is the prorated area of the $100,000. So you can only go up to $100,000 for a person's compensation or an independent contractor. Okay. Any taxes that are imposed under these sections for the Internal Revenue Code, really that's Social Security and Medicare tax, federal withholdings, other types of unemployment tax, you name it, things of that sort are not covered. And any compensation for employees whose principal place of residence is outside of the United States also. So let's say that you do have a missionary and they're an independent contractor, really, because you're giving them a 1099, but they're in a foreign country, doesn't qualify. Sometimes in a small business too, this could be people working on border states. You know, they live in another state. I mean, you just got to sort of evaluate where they're getting paid and where they're working.
So again, if I could ask a quick question here, right? So when I see this compensation of an individual in excess of $100,000 annual salary, so does that mean that if I have any directors, executive pastors, senior leadership that are compensated above that $100,000 mark, they're not included in the calculation?
No, they are included, but not in the amount over the 100,000. So
it'll go up to that.
Up to the 100,000. So let's give like an example. Let's say you have an employee who makes 150,000 and you have an employee who makes 80,000. Okay, that's $230,000 of payroll in a year, right? But because it's limited to 100,000, the first employee would only count for 100. The second employee would count towards 80,000. So your total annual wages is, in that example, 180, right? The 100 plus the 80.
Yep.
And then you would divide the 180 by 12, the 12 months to get your, I think that would be $15,000, right? Yep. Average per month.
Yep. So we already started talking about this. So why don't we jump into a further breakdown of how do we calculate this loan amount? So we talked about that cap, right? Up to $100,000. And so the way that we would get there would be, so let's say that person that we pay, their salary is $80,000, but they also have retirement. They also have state taxes. They also have maybe a health insurance premium that the organization is paying. All of those things would allow us to get up to that $100,000 cap.
Correct. Right. Everything goes up to 100,000.
Gotcha.
All inclusive, but not anything over that.
Yep. So why don't we go through a specific example?
Let's do this. So you need to define what your payroll costs are, and then when you do that, you need to do the average monthly payroll over a 12-month period. Now let's define, what does the 12-month period look like in this regard? If we sign the SBA loan with the SBA department, that's how the government's getting us the funds, right? In April, which is pretty much, that's what it's going to be, April of 2020. We have to do the average cost, or the average payroll cost between April 1st, 2019 through March of 2020. So we take that 12-month period and to figure out our payroll costs. So whatever that is from April of 2019 through March of 2020, and we divide it by 12, okay, to get the average monthly payroll costs. So let's give an example. This example, we came up with the average monthly payroll of $100,000, just for easy numbers. The factor that the statute says is we can multiply that by a 2.5 factor rate, okay? So in this example, you're gonna have $250,000 SBA loan that's gonna be issued under the section sub A loan. $250,000. The federal government through the SBA lending department is going to give the church $250,000 for this calculation, okay? So what do we do, right, with that loan? So on June 30, 2020, there's going to be another calculation that's done. We don't know exactly if that's going to be done in July or when it's going to be done, but the SBA department's going to issue regulations and guidelines on that. The $250,000, now, is that a loan or is it a grant? Now, here comes the secret, okay? If your full-time equivalent of a full-time employee, so let's define what a full-time employee is. If the person who works 40 hours per week is one full-time equivalent, FTE we call it, okay? Now, let's say you have an employee who works 10 hours a week. You have another employee who works another 10 hours, another 10 hours, another 10 hours. You have 4 employees, each work 10 hours per week. You add all those hours together, even though there are 4 people, it's only counted as one person because that's a one full-time employee, okay? So in this example we're giving you, an organization has 25 full-time employees in June of 2020. Now there's an averaging effect of this. It's actually going to go from February to June of 2020, and then you look back last year to February of June of 2019, and you calculate your FTE there, and then you calculate your FTE here in 2020, and you have to compare the two. So if you have your 2019 FTE totals here, and in this example, let's say it's 25, or excuse me, 26. And then if you say in 2020, our average was 25. So we went down 1 person, right? We didn't replace 1 person. Our staffing levels went down. If it goes down a little bit, the percentage of that loan is the difference becomes taxable, or not taxable, excuse me, a true loan. So you take the 250, excuse me, that should be 25.
Yeah, we added extra.
25.
The Lord blessed, and
Yeah.
you went from 25 employees to 250. So that should be 25 and 26.
Yeah, 25 and 26. So 25 employees divided by 26 that you had in 2019, so you came down 1. So you had 96% retention, right, of your FTE. So what happens is 96% of that loan is forgiven and it becomes a grant, meaning there's nothing paid back. The 4% of the decrease is the $10,000, or the 4% of the loan now is paid back over 10 years. So what happens is in July of 2021, which is a year out after this calculation is done, you start to repay that loan, and the loan goes over 10 years, okay? Now, with planning, you could plan to say, listen, we've got to get our FTE up, right? To get it back up to 26. And if you had even Steven, right, just 100% to 100% of the FTE comparison, you would literally 100% of the loan would be forgiven. The government would say, never pay it back. Okay, isn't that amazing?
That's incredible.
I mean, this is the biggest windfall for churches from our government forever, really. And so this is an incredible opportunity. This is for small businesses as well. The loan is absolutely forgiven, and the loan, there's no payback. So anyways, that's what you got to do. That's the way you got to calculate it. So you want to be maintaining your FTE doesn't decrease at all. Okay.
So a question that just came in, maybe since we're talking about calculation, that we could address right now. So the question is, does the 2.5 times payroll figure include federal as well as state and local taxes?
Only state and local taxes.
And that goes back to what you had said about federal, Social Security, Medicare
Yeah,
are
that does
not
not count.
included
Right.
in the overall calculation.
Does not count.
Gotcha. So that, I mean, pretty much is the 20,000 foot overview. Let me jump in and make sure that I'll take a look at any other questions that are coming in. Steve, are there any other thoughts?
Yeah, so let's talk about what are next steps, right? Next steps are really contacting us and engaging us to help you if you need help with this, right? Ultimately, we are now looking for this loan package to be offered with the Small Business Administration Department. So does your bank operate SBA lending, right? I've heard some comments through the news as well as well as through the American Banking Association, that more banks will be expanded to offer this type of loan, because there's going to be literally a deluge of people that are going to be asking for these funds, right? Mm-hmm. There's going to be literally millions of companies, millions of organizations that are going to be applying for this. So the banking system, it won't be overran with money, because the Federal Reserve is going to kick this in to the Treasury. But what I would say to you is this, is the processing of this is going to be huge. There's going to be a lot of work, okay? Yeah. So next steps, call us, call Cheney and Associates, reach out to us. We want to help you with this. You can engage our services to help you get this loan done. We will help you do the calculations. We'll help you fill out the application. We'll help you get that submitted. We're working with banks right now to get packages put together so that we can bring all of this together for you. It's very important to realize something. We'll help you pull all the documents that you need for the loan, to pull all that together. The other thing that we'll help you do as well is understand that there's no personal guarantee to this loan. There's no building. You don't have to have a surety towards your building. There's no, the board members do not have to have any personal guarantees. This is a completely securitized loan by the federal government. Nothing you own will ever be attached to this loan. The only thing you have to sign is a good faith certificate, is what they're calling it, that you understand that you will use this money for payroll, for mortgage, for utilities, for things like that are listed in the statute. And literally, that is all you have to do. So if you have a church membership, there is no loan for this purpose, because there's no guarantee against the property. If this loan was never, ever to ever repaid back, even the statute itself says that the government is just going to pick up the loan.
So here's a good question, and thank you for that. That's great clarification. What if you have a full-time employee quit in the middle of the period, or maybe you fire them, right? Because they aren't doing their job, and they're not replaced within that. And the way that I read this question is they're not replaced within that specific area. So let's say you have somebody in your kids department either quits or you let them go, and you don't hire back that position.
Yeah, perfect question.
How does that affect the calculation?
So just let me give you an example. Let's say you have a youth pastor and they make, I don't know, let's say $75,000 a year. Most youth pastors out there are like, do I make $75,000 a year? But that's a joke. You have a youth pastor who makes $75,000 a year, and he goes on to be with a new church, or resigns, or you let him go. Somehow he's not on payroll anymore, right? This is not based upon, did we replace the youth pastor at $75,000 per year? What it says is, did you replace that person with a full-time equivalent at any level? So the FTE calculation is on head count, not dollar count, not position count, nothing. So you could literally hire on a lower level person, let's say an administrative person at, let's say, minimum wage, right? Make them full time, and then that would help you count towards bringing your FTE back up to where you need it to get the debt forgiveness, the loan forgiveness, excuse me.
Yeah, a couple other questions here. A friend heard on a broadcast last night that mortgage and utility payments can be included as part of that. Is that true?
In the current statute as it exists right now, I do not see that as part of the layout of the payroll costs. What I see it
And to clarify, we're talking about in the initial calculation for how much gets multiplied by that 2.5 multiplier.
correct. You're talking about the payroll cost in the equation.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what I think that they were assuming that is you can utilize the funds you get to pay the mortgage or utilities, but it doesn't count towards the calculation.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I see in the statute. Now, there's other SBA loans that have come into play in this statute, but it's a totally different section that churches do not get. So churches don't get, businesses would get. So let's say you have an SBA loan previously to the coronavirus coming out and before this statute, there is another section where a person could get their utility, or excuse me, their SBA loan deferred for 6 months. That is not in the statute we're talking about right now. That is not part of the payroll protection program.
Gotcha. Good question. Thank you for that. A couple more. What about if you provide a SECA reimbursement to exempt employees? Can that be counted in the calculation?
That is, well, SECA reimbursement is not taxes, even though that's what we want to call it, and that's what you're giving the person. It's actually wages, because
wages.
it's taxable wages. So you absolutely, it can be included in the payroll count costs.
Because where that would show up on their W-2.
It's box 1.
Yep, absolutely. Another question, how do you calculate the 1099 contractors that were paid out? So you mentioned that contractors, payments to contractors can be included in this. How would you go about calculating that amount?
So the way you calculate that amount is really based upon the annual of just 2019. So it's got to be over the covered period, but it's really what was on the 1099 is ultimately the calculation it's going to be, okay? It talks about having it be part of the covered period that you are calculating the payroll costs, but ultimately, let's say it's a person you pay on a regular basis. It could be your pastor, it could be the janitor, it could be whoever applies to receive a 1099, even though a pastor doesn't anymore. Some people are still getting paid that way. You would include that 12-month payment portion of it. Now, if it's just for if you want to just take the 2019 1099 and use that as an example and get a number plugged in there, that's what I would do. Just make sure it's not over $100,000.
So that cap still applies. Gotcha. Great questions. Do we know when we can start applying? Steve Munchin stated that banks should be ready to roll this out by the end of next week.
I have heard that the applications from the SBA will be available next Friday with the specific
Next Friday. So if you're
It's
watching
crazy.
a recording, we're talking about a week from
today.
Wow.
Which, what is today, the 27th?
27th.
Yeah, it's March 27th. So the week has just flown by. But who knows if that's available? Yesterday I called a bank that does SBA lending, and the banker didn't even know of what a Paycheck Protection Program was. So I don't think that they have a sense of urgency because they have all the money they need anyways, right? So what I would say to you is this, is what I've heard and what I've seen as an executive summary coming out is that they want to start saying, everybody start applying next Friday. Now, here's what we're going to do though in the process. After this phone call, I've got another call in a couple of hours that bankers are going to call me to say, here's the application. We might actually get this ahead of schedule. With Cheney & Associates. So if you reach out to us, if you get sort of on our list, and we will be keeping you up to date. We want to help you with this. Now we are going to charge a fee for this, just to let you know, but it's going to be extremely reasonable fee to help you get this done. We're helping the local church and local businesses to bring finances into God's kingdom. That's what we're about. If you have people in your church that need help, reach out to us. This is what we're about.
Absolutely. And referring to next steps, because some of this is in flux, and we do want to make sure that all the churches we work with, we get those applications in right away. As we mentioned at the beginning of the call, we do have a national lender, a bank right. They're local. We have a local branch right here next to our office. That they are an SBA approved lender, so they're not beholden to some of the additional requirements for approvals that other non-SBA lenders would be required to adhere to. So there's a fast track there. We've got the bat phone to basically the VP of the bank who said, we called him up and said, hey, if we send you 1,000 churches, can you handle 1,000 churches? And he says, we'll take 2,000. We'll take them all.
Yeah.
So
a couple of questions too. I'll just address here. I see this. There's a question about if we don't need the money right now, but we need it later, should we do it? No, you should do it immediately now. This doesn't matter. If you had $1 trillion in your bank account as the church, which who would have that much money? But if you have a bunch of money in your bank account and you're like, we don't really need the money right now, you still want to apply for this. Here's why. There's only $350 billion available for this program right now. Now we think they're going to be extended. President Trump said they're going to have a $2 trillion stimulus now. By the end of the summer, it might be up to $6 trillion that the government might spend. So, but what I want to say to you is this is limited. This has nothing to do with how much money you have in your bank account, whether it be a lot or a little. You need to get the money now. The government says that you qualify no matter what is in there. Now, talking about our fee, we will help churches. There's a lot of churches out there hurting right now. They have no money. They've been 2 weeks now without some people even be able to attend. They're not on really good online giving platforms. Here's what I'll say to you is we will stand with you. We'll make sure this gets calculated for you. Once you get the funds from the federal government, then you can pay our fee. We are not here to hurt you. We're here to help you, help guide you. So anyways, that's where we're about. Okay. Yeah,
and to stay up to date with that, David will be posting a link we have for just like our general sign up page where you can even share this with other pastors, other ministry leaders that you may know, where they can sign up for just an update. And our team's been working long hours to make sure that we're able to stay on top of this. In the next couple days, we'll be sending out like a next steps email. Because again, even though the application requirements have not been clearly specified, we know probably 80% of what we're going to need. So our goal is to front load this so we can start Monday by collecting those documents, getting them all in order, so that if that does come true and the application is released and opened up on Friday, we've got a stack of them ready to rock and roll.
Correct.
Yep. So David will be putting the link to the chat. You can also access that by going to our website, cheney-associates.com. Let's see if we can get to a couple more questions here. Aside from payroll, what other areas might be forgiven? I've heard mortgage and utilities are forgiven as well, potentially. Now, depending on what you mean by that, so the funds can be used to go to a couple main qualifying areas. One is your payroll. The other two are utilities and mortgage. So one of the things they're going to be looking at is not only did you keep the same number of full-time equivalent employees, but from what we've read so far, in a 8-week period following the origination of that loan, can you show that you used up to or exceeding that entire amount to go to payroll, mortgage, and utilities, right? And if we're talking about 2.5 months of payroll, there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to show and demonstrate you've been able to use those funds in a qualifying manner. Now, just a quick note there, what it's not for is to make like a prepayment on your mortgage. There's specific language that precludes organizations from doing that, but there's no reason why we wouldn't be able to use those funds to go toward those qualifying areas.
Yeah. A great question here that I see. What about loss of business? Meaning people probably, cancel contracts, things of this sort. Again, the calculation based upon the Paycheck Protection Program is based upon payroll cost times the factor 2.5. If you had losses of business, meaning cancel contracts and things, there's other disaster relief loans that the SBA will give you. I know that there's a $25,000 loan that you can get within days of that kind of stuff. But that is a true loan without forgiveness. This right here that we're talking about is only for paychecks. It's the payroll costs that you're going to do, and you can use it for other factors. But the forgiveness of that, why is the government forgiving these loans? Because number one, they don't want to, 25 million people on unemployment in 3 months.
Yeah.
Right. That's why they're doing this. That what they're saying is employers, which is churches, small businesses, please keep your people on payroll. Here's some funds that we're giving you to do this, right? And so this is why they're doing this one specific loan.
Yep. When calculating payroll costs, do you include payroll taxes? We answered that briefly, but just to recap that, state taxes, yes, but federal, Social Security, and Medicare, no.
So what kind of state taxes would apply on that? Let me tell you. Unemployment, for state unemployment tax, right? But not the federal. SDI but that's really an employee portion. So anything that you're paying for the employer that's required for the state, right? It's going to be minimal, even in the state of California. Most of the stuff is personal income tax, right?
Yeah.
And so, anyways.
Yeah, some states I know would have municipality or school district taxes. Denver has an occupational privilege tax, right, that you have to pay. So all of those state, local, municipality taxes would be eligible for inclusion. And this is where Steve says, there's a lot of complexity here. There's a lot of different things to make sure you're with caps and regulations and requirements. This is where we're committed to leveraging all of our resources. As a CPA firm that's been serving churches for almost 20 years, to say, hey, how can we stand in the gap for our churches and make sure that these funds are released into your church so that you can in turn be a blessing to your community and release ministry into the areas of your community that need it most.
Yeah.
Any other questions you see on your end, Steve, that you'd like to address?
I was going off of the chat questions. I don't know about the Q&A questions.
So it looks like we've addressed most of them. There's one I do want to circle back to. You alluded to it briefly, but the question was, is there any indication of any qualifications to obtain this loan? For example, if January and February were the best months in our history, is my organization still eligible to receive these monies?
So state that last part again.
So let's say January and February,
yeah,
gangbusters, right? All other churches we're seeing 20, 30, 40%
don't worry about it.
dips in giving.
Has nothing to do with your giving. Has nothing to do with the lack of or the surplus of giving. This has to do with payroll costs. So
beautiful. Sounds good. All right, let me do one last look here. This is a great question. What are your fees?
Well, we definitely do not want to limit your blessing.
Come on now.
Come on now. It's more blessed to give than to receive. So, you're getting a lot. So, anyways, typically on average, let's say that a church would get $50,000. Our fee is between $1,000 and $1,500. So that's what it would be. There is a graduated rate on that. We'll get you specific information, but I'm telling you, it's pennies on the dollar compared to what you're getting. So if you got $100 and you shared a couple of them, that's fine with us. But what we would do is we'll be able to fast track it. We have right now, we're organizing group leaders, professionals, of financial people, of tax practitioners to help us come into play. Because we know if we got 1,000 churches that hit us, what does that mean? I mean, I can't do all the work. Tim, you can't do all the work. But what we're going to do is bring all this in. So I've got to pay some people to help with this. But what we're going to do is say, you know what, give a person, a dozen of those churches and do this in one day. And then work through the whole entire process. So that's what we're about.
Yep. Absolutely. What type of documentation will need to be submitted in determining the average annual payroll number? Do we know that yet?
Yeah, well, for the most part we do. We'll have to see the payroll registers summarized for that annual period. We'll have to see quarterly returns. We'll have to see the 1099s.
Yep.
We'll also have to see legal documents. And so that's part of what we'll do. We have a worksheet to get you through that and to help us.
And this is one of those things where we had talked about at the beginning. It's gone to, and assuming, who knows, the president may have signed it while we've been on this call.
Yeah.
So once it goes to the SBA committee, they'll be clearly defining what type of documentation is required, what payroll registers they want to see. So we don't know what that looks like yet. It may be a form, it may be a form and some documentation. It's probably going to be a little mixture of both.
Yeah. The health sharing ministry networks. I have a question. I see a question here about employer-sponsored group healthcare versus the sharing ministries, health ministries.
Like a health share.
Yeah, health share ministries. It's pretty vague on that. Like versus the high deductible plan is what it says. It just says what are your group healthcare costs. So I know Christian Healthcare Ministries is like a group. It's recognized under the Obamacare sort of regime and that taxation. But I personally would include it because it says total. It's part of the payroll cost. Also, too, I see here things that says what about stipends to people? This is all payroll. Okay, it's all part-time people's payroll. It's all full-time people's payroll. It's all things that you pay out. So if you do pay stipends, $50. If those people, if that's taxable to them, it's included.
Yep. Now, when we get into the stipend, when we get into the who's a contractor, who's an employee, that's a whole nother issue that Steve and I, we talk with clients at length about. This is also a great wake-up call to say, hey, if we're stipending people, if we have people that we're paying as contractors that really should be employees, now's a great time to rectify that.
Yeah.
Not only are you exposing yourself to significant liability, which we could spend the next hour and tell horror stories of things that we've seen, but again, underneath the way that it's currently written, it's employees and contractors will be eligible.
Yeah. One thing that's great about this one, I see a question about any closing costs. There will be no closing costs. There's no origination fee, nothing for this loan. The reason why is because there's nothing being attached to it. There's no title that's necessary.
Yep.
I see another question here about the date range. So let's talk about that. So when the loan plan's into place. So let's say you sign a loan in April of 2020. You have to look back at the prior 12 months. So the payroll costs are calculated from April of 2019 through March of 2020. That's how you determine the 12-month average of payroll costs. Then the June 2020 date comes into play as to the FTE. I think comparison, excuse me.
Yeah, where you're going from February to June 2019.
That's for the full-time equivalent calculation because the government is again saying, don't lower your full-time equivalent, keep it up or increase it because we don't want you laying people off, right? That's important. And we have strategies that we can help you work through that, okay?
Well, that's great. I know we're coming up. We had initially looked at about 45 minutes for this. We're just a little bit past that. So I just want to say again, thank you for everyone that jumped on the call. If you have any other questions, I
want to clarify one more question to one more person because this is so the 2.5 number. Okay, that is not 2.5 months. It's 2.5 as a factor as to what you multiply the payroll costs to. The payroll costs are averaged over a 12-month period. So take the annual wages over a period of time, divide it by 12. Whatever that number is, you multiply it by a factor. The factor is just 2.5. That's what it is, okay?
Now that factor was, as of last Friday, that factor was 4.
Correct.
And then there's a lot of arguments that went around, and that got knocked down to 2.5. Not as nice as 4, but still, I mean, what an incredible benefit to the ministry.
Yeah. Now, if somebody wanted to look at the factoring, you can say, well, it's an average of 1 month, right? So 2.5 is 2.5 months. Okay, whichever way we're going to look at it, right? But I'm just saying the factor is 2.5.
Yep. Well, again, thank you for joining us. As Steve mentioned, it's our heart and our desire to stand with you and your ministry and your church and the church leaders that you serve. I know we've got some district leadership on the call. It's our heart to link arms. And so again, David will be posting that link as much as we can do to help you and your church. That's what we're here for. So anything else, Steve?
We just have such great comments right now. Just two more quick ones because this popped up. So again, there was a thing about a Christian-owned camp. Okay, if they have a separate EIN, even though they're organized under the district office. Okay, the district camp, if they have their own EIN, they file their own payroll tax returns. They have to file the SBA loan on their own. Okay, the district would file one separately. Okay. Second thing is if you're already a client of Cheney and Associates, we have hundreds of clients all over the country. But I will say this to you, that if you're already a client, reach out to us. We're going to already be reaching out to you to get this stuff done. So a lot of the payroll information we already have. We've already started dropping all that information in. We've already got all the 1099s. We need to talk about this. So we're going to reach out to you guys as well. Reach out to us. Thank you very much.
Yep.
And it's such an honor to be with you guys today. Remember, I just want you to know that we're here to help support the local church and to just do what we can to be wise stewards. You know, our byline is we believe in what we call the 4 R's. We want to get the right information to the right person at the right time to make the right decision. And we believe that today having this webinar was all of the 4 R's were met.
Yep.
Right. We're getting you some right information to make sure that you can make the right decision. Now, these funds are not going to be utilized to take over your right, your First Amendment rights, your religious rights, nothing else. The government is literally giving you a freebie. There's no strings attached that I've seen. So anyways, God bless you all. And we'd love to serve you guys. Reach out to us and we'll be in contact very, very soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks again.